Hello to everyone, and welcome to the drawing board or drawing table, whatever you prefer, once again. This is a series of videos where I like to go over some classic comic books or classic graphic novels. It's not necessarily an entire series, it could just be a run on a particular line of comics, as it is the case of this one today, where simply either might like the artist and the art that was done for it very much, or it might just be an interesting story arc. Case in point, today is a short series from Marvel called Ka-Zar, the Savage. To a lot of you, this might mean nothing. To a few of the older ones, it could mean a little bit, but not much more than a meh. Ka-Zar is one of those characters that made kind of a transfer from a narrative storybook similar to Conan and another character of Robert E. Howard, Cull and Sonja, and then eventually was adapted to the actual sequential art form. And like like a few other characters produced by Marvel, he went through different iterations. So initially, it was a character created for Timely Comics in the late 30s. Obviously inspired by Tarzan, and then he was brought back in the 60s by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, just like they had done to a few other characters, obviously Captain America being the most obvious one, but also for the ones that don't know, Drax, for example, was an old character, even from before Timely Comics, which at those times, things were characters were purchased from one publisher to another, or they were just passed on down publishing deals. And Drax was actually a very old character, which was in turn inspired by the Phantom, which you will know as the guy in the purple uniform with the gun and the mask and the ring. And then obviously now is part of the Guardians of the Galaxy, popularized by the movies. But back to Ka-Zar. Ka-Zar had a few series of his own, self-titled series. This one, I think, is the third one from 1981. So this is the early 80s one, and he ran for a total of 30-something issues. I'm a stern fan of the first few issues. Don't know why, like in a lot of lines from Marvel. It seems that there was a lot of impetus in the beginning to push the book out with great art and great storytelling, and then things obviously start getting a bit muddled up, start getting a little bit tiresome. And in the case of the third series of Ka-Zar, which is this one here, I really lost interest after the first 12 issues. Really, I never bothered myself to get all the 30-something the complete collection. Obviously, this is not the same for every single line, but it did happen to this one. Let's just go over a couple of these issues, just to show you why I like it and talk a bit more about it. Alright, here we have issue 3 on this series called Ka-Zar the Savage. The penciler for most of these issues, probably almost all of them, it's Brett Anderson. Inks, I think, is mostly one other recurring fella called Carlos Garcon. But I'm not sure if he stays for the whole of the series. Nonetheless, Brett Anderson is definitely the hallmark. Let's not forget that a lot of times Marvel just had a few gaps to fill in during their monthly comic release schedule. And Ka-Zar kind of is one of those filler characters or filler titles. We can probably call that. Although this particular series, I think, it stands up quite well on his own, and there's quite a few nice touches, and that's the reason why I wanted to go over it. Um, Ka-sar the Savage. He's called a savage because basically he's actually unlike Tarzan. Well, he's the son of a lord as well, a son of an English lord, so very similar premise. And his father eventually gets killed in the jungle, and is old enough, not a baby infant like Tarzan and raised by monkeys. He's old enough to kind of uh, raise himself in the jungle with the help of Zabu, which is a saber-toothed tiger. Now, the reason why he's called a savage is because he resides in the savage land. So a little bit of a backstory for the ones that actually are not familiar with the premise. The Savage Land is a particular place in the Marvel Comics universe, which is just below Antarctica, so beneath Antarctica, and was created by an alien species as a playground, or more like a zoo, to see how species would develop on Earth. So basically, he's a remnant from the prehistorical times. So it has a series of dinosaurs in it. It has a series of primate humanoids, and a bunch of other species that develop completely independently from the rest of the Earth. So it's a kind of a playground, like of a sandbox that Marvel created to be able to have a whole series of story arcs and heroes roam around in this universe below a universe, similar to what you humans living on the moon are as well. So it's another way for Marvel to create an environment where further and more exotic adventures can happen. So like that, you can have jungle-bound adventures, which were very popular in the 60s and even throughout the 70s, and then eventually kind of died off. I don't think it's popular anymore. But it was just a way to introduce that into the comic books, the average Marvel reader, without going out of the main universe. So Ka-zar lives in the Savage Land, so he's called Ka-zar the Savage, but he is very illiterate. He's a well-learned man, although obviously he's been living by himself for some time. The opening page here on issue 3, we have a badminton game with this bird people, which are residents, and the birds helping to carry Ka-zar and Shanna the she-devil, and we'll get back to her in a little bit. Page 2 and 3, a spread. I love this. Sometimes in the simplest stories, in the simplest art, not only you'll find great delight, but you'll also find something very unusual and surprising. So, here's 2 pages with exposition, yeah? A badminton game. Now, what is different about this badminton game? Well, both heroes are straddled on top of these giant bats, completely domesticated, help them to go up and down depending on the necessities of the game. And it's not just a little bit of exposition surrounding the previous episode. It is also a lover's quarrel. And it's one thing these guys in this series did very well is continuity. I mean, there is obviously a dispersion of characters, from left to right and from top to bottom, but it follows sequentially follows the narrative to the dot. So it's self-explanatory, without any forced visuals, and any movements of the characters are perfectly understandable within the premise. Characters in this story, both man and female, show a lot of their body, and that's a great thing about the old comics, especially the late 70s and the early 80s comics, which are my favorite. There's no shame in showing the body. The guys are guys, they're muscled. Even in these peculiar detail here that this bird species it's taller and averagely stronger than a human. And when the guys fight, they fight viciously. There's black eyes, there's blood, there's kicks to the groin, straight punches, and all this. I mean, now when you have a comic where Wonder Woman breaks Superman arm, almost scotches his eyes out to the point that he's crying blood. Even though that's very great, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And when he's done it as a spread, or as a or even more as a double page spread. Back then, violence was violence, and it was visceral, and there was no many calms on how they were going to show it. Straight away, this is a vicious fight, and the women were women. They were hot, and they fought as well. And when they fought, it was nasty. And when there was innuendo, there was a lot. There was proper innuendo. Women would be flirty, and men would be flirty with women, and there was no bad judgments in place. It was not rape, and it was not sexual harassment, and and this cannot be perceived, obviously, by today's liberal audiences, liberal writers, as an insult to the readership or to particular genders. It's just what it is. It's a good story. It's a good old yarn. But continuing on the art, full use is made of the pages. This one in particular, very nice, as a close up of the two of them on the top tier, and then mimicked by the bottom tier, the bottom left mimicking the top right, and the bottom right mimicking the top left in terms of size, with another Ka-sar suitor spying on him and then flying away. So obviously there's a lot of rivalry here. The blue bird woman likes Ka-sar, wants to get rid of Shanna, the shit devil, through any possible means. And again, great use of space, tall, long panels, as it is a bird species, so there's a lot of aerial shots, and like that you can structure your page with broad, dramatic scenes, dramatic shots, and again the action quite fluid and quite brutal. In another issue here, again a great use of space, and that's the thing that modern artists should always consider. Construct your pages and your panels in a way that is convenient and suitable for the story at hand. If you have a plot like this, where our heroes are mostly in the air, and their landscape, the landscape where they play, where their action, their story set is a wide canvas, like in this case nature, then have at it. Make your canvas wide. Similar when they're doing Spider-Man comics. I mean, that's a reason why Ditko produce the original Spider-Man pages the way he did. Make them wide, make them tall, make the panels dramatic, because he was suitable for that. He was a guy that is swinging across the buildings of New York. So if the panels are tight and, to convey the structure, the stone structure of a city like New York, then it's perfect. Obviously, there was certain confines related to the actual technique used at the time, in terms of the grid, the way that the pages were set up, and also in terms of the page count that each issue had. So again, the lines are simple, but it gives you everything you need. It gives you the story with all its glory, so to say. and you have quite dramatic and perfect panels. A little bit on Shanna then, the she-devil. There was a lot of jungle women back then. Shanna visual, her costume is great. They went for the whole swimsuit attire instead of just the traditional bikini. I think it's perfect as an option instead of being scantily clad like Sonja. Shanna is he dons his leopard skin, which still shows a lot of her skin, but it mainly covers the important bits, while still making her sexy and voluptuous. She has this bracelet here with the fangs, the teeth. She used to have that on her legs as well, but then it just replaced for a little bit more fur. And again, here we go. And when punches were pulled, there was no shame about it. Not the only panel where Ka-Zar smacks Shanna. A proper slap, which they actually, not to be so contentious, they show it from the back, so you don't actually see the contact. You don't know if it's a punch or a slap. Most likely a slap, but it's not the first, and it won't be the last time Ka-Zar does this to Shanna. And even Shanna gives him a few fresh ones once in a while. If it was part of the plot, they would do it. It is very unlikely you get this happening in a modern comic book. A man slapping a woman. No problem with having Wonder Woman cracking Superman's arms and gouging out his eyes, obviously, although I find that scene fun as well. But you won't see that in a modern comic book. You won't see this in a modern comic book. Now, Ka-Zar is slapping her because in the Savage Land, which is perpetually tropical, Shanna is seeing snow. And he's insisting she's seeing snow, and then actually grabs a bit of snow, throws it, and while she's throwing it, it turns into what he actually is, which is just soil, is earth. There is no snow, she's imagining it. She's under some sort of spell, and that's why Ka-Zar eventually slaps her to try to bring her out of her madness. Stressing the movements of the action until eventually the hero gets pierced with a scorpion style. And again, it's not just great action, well depicted. It's good dramatic action, because it's well presented. And you make full use of the page, both for story purposes and also for stylistic purposes. That's where all the energy and the talent goes into a comic book when this works. And the concepts were also pretty quirky. This is an early 80s story arc, and science fiction had obviously made major leaps in the last couple of decades. Since 2001 came out, and Planet of the Apes as well. And more sci-fi stories focusing on humane aspect, with more outlandish ideas than throughout the 70s, Soylent Green, Saturn V, and so on and so forth. So the more into the 80s you got, with body horror and mutants and all that stuff coming into play, that the stories were quite outlandish. Marvel was really pushing the envelope at this time. Shanna here is saved by a guy which is another inhabitant of the Savage Land, which is a guy that actually uses an astral projection to go around, and only becomes solid for short amounts of time, because all the rest of the time is actually living inside a chamber, which keeps him alive forever, but you only allows him to be immortal, but only allows him to walk around and see the world in an astral form. So he cannot really interact much with anyone or do much of anything unless he becomes solid, but he only becomes solid for very short amounts of time. And obviously that is a very interesting concept. It's a small it's a small concept on a broader story, with this character only showing up for a little bit. But him itself is a very interesting concept to explore, because he has to sacrifice himself in order to have Shanna and Ka-Zar surviving their ordeal in this particular episode. Well, there you go then. So this is another series of books that you guys should try out if you've never read it. Try Ka-Zar, the Savage. This particular run, which again is the one from early 80s, goes for 30-something issues. But if you get only the first 12, a dozen issues, you like it very much, I'm sure. You won't feel it's a waste of money, as they are pretty cheap. Obviously in very good condition, like these ones are, kind of a mint kind of state. You'll probably be looking at maybe $2 to $3 each. But you can, if it's just a read that you want to do, I'm sure you get them for much cheaper. And you feel surprised of these little things you'll find in the vault, so to speak. By the way, I will be starting my 100 Days of Comics on Monday, and that is me doing live streams of penciling and inking the final 2 issues of my comic book series, Chromosome 96. So this is issue 4 and 5 that I will be working on for hopefully 100 days straight. I know there will be a couple of days where I will not be able to do it already up front, I can tell you that, simply because I'm actually going to be changing my internet provider to give a little bit more juice and have more quality during the live streams. And that switch usually takes 2 or 3 days to happen. So I know a few days I will have to miss, unfortunately, but then, I'll make it up by doing longer streams another time. Now, obviously, the streams will be between 1 to 3 hours. Can't do it for the whole day, but hopefully in 100 days, so by end of January, the whole series will be completely penciled and completely inked, maybe just a few things missing, and you'll have the whole book done, really, and ready for you to purchase on the Indiegogo or Kickstarter. So hopefully I'll see you on Monday. Bye bye, and have a good one.